Hey everyone, I got my third video coming out now, and this one I thought I'd change it up a little bit and show a game where I have the black pieces. So in my on my path to master, I have several collaborators, all of who are at least 1800 strength FIDE, and we're all trying to get the master title ourselves. And this is from one of my Bulgarian collaborators on chess.com, game in 30 on the live chess server. So I had the black pieces, and I ended up playing a Sicilian, which is in line with my usual opening repertoire. So e4, c5, knight c3, knight c6, and f4. Now usually I don't face this type of Grand Prix in this move order. Usually people just go ahead and they play f4 against me immediately. In response to f4, I play e5, which is an interesting line of the King's Gambit declined known as the Mafia defense, but this is a different line. So in f4, I'm not quite used to determining how to approach this, so I went with the old fallback, see if you can push d5 in the Sicilian. So I went e6, knight f3, d5. So white has a couple of responses here. The best one is to play bishop b5 and just try and pin so that there's not much action happening with this pawn here at all. And to which I'll play probably knight g7, then I'm going to go g6, bishop g7, and then I'm going to castle, bishop d7, and then I'm probably going to think about kicking the bishop here. Now, if we go back, white did not play this and played a more passive line, which is interesting because their opening repertoire is usually quite aggressive. So d3, and I would say immediately that black is already slightly better here out of the opening, doesn't even need to bother really with equalizing. So the best thing, there's a couple of best lines probably just develop, and I chose a more interesting line to capture and relieve tension and see if I can open the d file, get things going. So here there's two responses, obviously. I believe that knight takes e4 is the best line here. For black, in response, bishop e7 is the best response. After g3 here from white overprotecting this pawn, we're going to go knight f6 here, and that's best. But another line would be knight f6. This is not as good because if we look at takes, black's queen is slightly misplaced here, and it can't really go anywhere. White's just going to enjoy an interesting and fun developing game. g3, bishop g2, castle, and then probably something like c3, bishop e3, and d4. Just get some center pawns rolling here. So instead, my collaborator played d takes e4, and this just worsens his own position. So I take the trade, put the knight back on the first file, and I go bishop d7. So here I had to think of an opening setup, and I wasn't really sure at this point if I wanted to castle either kingside or if I wanted to castle queenside at this point. So I was really leaving myself the option here. It is probably best to castle kingside in this position just because we've already made the c5 pawn push, and you don't really want to put your king on a square here that could leave him open. So really just developing a piece. The only caveat with the bishop here is that it's probably best placed on b7 here. So an idea like, if we go back, b6, bishop b7. However, this is too slow in the opening. So if I had decided that castling kingside is indeed the best option, I probably should have just gone for a plan like knight f6, bishop e7 castles, and then play b6 here, see what I can get out of the position. So bishop d7, my opponent plays c3, making sure that I can't make any trades, and any trades here would allow the pawn to move off of this file, and therefore letting the bishop out a little bit more. So a fairly decent move, and I go with a bit of an interesting move order here. So knight g7, my goal is to go from knight here, knight here to knight here, and then bishop out. I determined that knight on this square, g6, is best. Knight f6 is not doing so good. It doesn't have a whole lot of scope. White can eventually play something approximating the Marazzi bind if he wants, and my knight doesn't really have a lot of locations to go to, so instead it can think about harassing this pawn, maybe even thinking about pushing e5 at some point, which would support that. So bishop e3, and bishop e3 is a good developing move for him, but it also just gives me the tempo to play a move that I want to anyways, just knight g6. Now if we look what happens later in the game, bishop e3 did not turn out to be a happy square for it, and there's no real clear reason why, but perhaps not the best location for it at this point. A simpler idea, like, let's see here, just developing the bishop here and castling, and then seeing where you want to locate your dark squared bishop to might be better, especially since white's goal here is rapid development. So knight g6, g3, over protecting the pawn here, building a strong center with the pawns, that's what you want to do. And I go a tiny bit astray here. White is better out of the opening here, but it's not significant. So I play rook c8, bishop g2, b6. I'm really just solidifying my queen side. Nothing's really going to be happening over there for the next couple of moves. So I'll go through the next couple of moves pretty quickly. Nothing special is happening. We see castles, bishop d6, and knight d2. So ideally the idea here is to put a knight on c4, this knight here to f2, maybe think about pushing e5, and then this knight here onto e4, and then we have a strong bind on the d6 square for white here. Now, I looked at this position, and when you're objectively analyzing your own position, you have to determine what really is going on. So if you look at it over here on the queen side pawns here are all locked up. They're not going to move anytime soon. The center, pretty static. I'm not going to be able to get this e5 idea in at a good moment anytime soon. It's too premature. And if I just castle kingside, then where is my action really going? So I took a bit of a risk, but I said, okay, in this position, something needs to happen. I need to turn it dynamic so I can try and win the game and take chances. So I said to myself, well, the only action that's going to be happening is if I've got these two bishops pointing over here, and I've got this rook pointing here, and all these lovely pawns that can just go up, then I should probably be thinking about shunting this rook over here too so it can go after the king. So that being said, king e7, I subjectively think, is quite a decent move in this position. Engines don't like it too much, but it's a nice idea to try and create activity and also determining where the activity will be on the board. So my opponent played e5, which is perhaps a little bit hasty in this position. Knight f2 might be a better idea, and we'll see why e5 is so detrimental in just a second. Drop my bishop back to b8, knight c4. So, like I said before, he's got this idea of knight f2, knight e4, and then we're just going to create a very strong bind on this d6 square. However, because this pawn is here on e5 so early on, I can pawn break immediately with f6. And this pawn break will potentially open up the f-file here for me. And also, it destroys a lot of white's base in the center. So my opponent exchanged, and we have an interesting hanging pawn type structure here. Fairly fluid right now. I'm not thinking about pushing either side yet. I'm just going to leave it, and probably just going to plop the rook over there and try and get some action going immediately. And we'll see what happens in the center. Basically, white in response is going to try and get this knight somewhere, maybe here, and try and get activity out of the position. So, knight f2. Interestingly, there's also a pawn sacrifice here. Not so good, but it does create some interesting chances for white. So I'll take a brief look at it. So f5, e takes is forced. Knight f2 is not so good. Then I have bishop e6 solidifying. I'm quite better here. Bishop h6 is another interesting sideline because white can start thinking about tossing in checks with knight f2, rook here, maybe even a g4 break, just trying to get something out of this position, opening up files since my king is stuck in the center here. And the dark squared bishop does really add to that by pressurizing my weak dark squares on the king side here. So knight f2, fine developing move, and I play h5. I'm just continuing with my plan. I'm going to toss everything at the king side, and as we see, these bishops are already starting to open up as opposed to where they were a couple of moves ago. So, bishop e4. Once again, not the best move. What he really wants to do in this position, get this knight into play, and these rooks are a bit stuck too. This bishop here on g2 was doing a fine defensive job, and that's what he really wants to do, because also in this position we see, okay, where is black's activity going to be? It's going to be on the king side, so we're not going to want to take away a defensive piece from there. We're going to instead want to attack in the center where black's king is again. Now, I played a very interesting move here, so if you want to take a minute to pause your video and see if you can find the move I played, I'll let you do so. Otherwise, I will proceed ahead now. The engine says best move here is rook cg8. Not by much, though. So it's just getting your pieces to nice squares. We're beginning to think about maybe pushing h4 somewhere, maybe f5 first, though, just so that g4 can't be pushed later. f5 just keeps pressure against the g4 square here. So knight d3, h4, g4, and f5 is another way to initiate the pawn break here. Instead of an immediate g4, king g2 is also an idea. King is a bit open, but I should be able to get some nice activity with a later f5 here, and just seeing what I can do with these open rooks along these files now. Now, I did not play rook cg8. I saw this move immediately, thought it looked like a fun joke, and then started calculating and realizing there's actually some solid lines based off of this. My opponent told me in the post-game analysis that he actually thought I just blundered the whole piece on g6 here, so I'm guessing you can tell what the move is right now, but h4 is quite pretty here. So we'll take a quick we'll take a look at the lines coming off of this. So bishop takes g6. We're already starting to head into questionable territory here, as white really allowing this pawn to come in here and devastate the white king side. So h takes, we're threatening to take a piece back, and we've already won a pawn, and we're starting to open up the g file against the king, so we're doing quite fine here as black. And this was not really a sacrifice. Now, if we take a look at the recapture here of h takes g3. Now, the first move you've got to play, rook cg8. Then we're probably going to see something. If you want to try and save the bishop, it's going to be bishop e4 here. And at this point, we're going to double, and we're going to win this piece right here. And black is in quite dire straits, so he doesn't really want to go for this line, and my opponent realized at this point that this is not favorable for him at all. So instead of taking there, he decided to go for knight d3. And I did not react my best that I could have here. The best line is g takes h2 check. And king h1 is the best move you can do. It looks a little bit scary, but it's really preventing any forward advancement of this pawn, and you're really just going to tuck and hide and weather the onslaught in this position. So at this point, I'm probably just going to play a move like knight d4, and we're threatening some mate ideas here, and also some rook cg8 things going on over here as well. If he goes king f2 instead, then we have f5, which is a later idea we'll see of shutting this light squared bishop off from the position. Knight d5, take, because we want to defend try and defend the bishop here on g6, but here we still have the exchange, and there, and after a check like this, we're going to tuck and hide, and black will come out of this with a lovely position and probably some mating nets quite soon as an idea. Now, I did not react, as I said, the best way here. I allowed the bishop to escape. Another nice line here would instead be f5 immediately, just shutting off the bishop here, and white is going to have to sacrifice his bishop at some point. So we see rook cg8, bishop e4, f5. The pawns are now fixed. This bishop is no longer has the potential to be strong, attack these light squares around the king. Another move here would be g takes, and we're going to keep perpetuating the fact that white's king is pretty stuck here. So after these series of moves, after bishop g2 back from e4, black sacrifices objectively poor. I did not come up with the best play to support that. However, this position is difficult to play, especially in a rapid game. My opponent probably only had about 12 minutes left by this point, as opposed to my 20. I consider myself to have fairly good time management when playing rapid games, so that's a reason why. So, takes, and king f2. So this is another case where white should have gone king h1, and he's just going to hide, and maybe an idea here, like there, and he's going to double on the f-file, something like this, and the position's just going to hold, wait, and essentially the piece over the two pawns should eventually hold out for white. So king f2 allows later ideas potentially of this, and rook might have to get stuck behind here as well. So the king can run away over to the queen side, but another piece will then, of course, later have to be delegated to be fixed to this square. So knight d8, and this idea basically is we're going to hop here, and we're going to go all the way there just to protect this pawn, and we've got some nasty looking forks as well. So this is a nice knight maneuver that in these types of positions, if you don't have anything immediate to look for, you should be looking for ways to get your pieces into best squares, and as we see here, this knight on c6, it's not the best square for it. It can't really go, to any key squares that it wants to over here, so instead we're going to try and fix it onto the g4 square. So knight d8, knight c5, a really great idea just to further hold in on this square, and it's a lovely centralized knight. So white is still better here, and I proceed with a little bit of an interesting and probably dubious maneuver that's intended to just try and fix white's position and test him to see if he will move these knights. Now, he probably won't, but the idea is to see what happens. Also, make him take a little bit more time off of his clock. So bishop b5, the idea is to exchange. Knight will have to exchange back if he doesn't do anything about it, and now knight can come to f7 unfettered and ready to hop into these nice squares over here. So he played c4, and I just go to bishop e8. And my idea here is, after playing c4, this c-file is really quite locked off here for a while, and with the fixation of the pawns, he can't get anything dangerous going on, and after I divert my bishop back here, perhaps I can get something going. So rook h1, fixing the piece behind the pawn, and I don't really have anything better to do with this bishop, so it's time to exchange it off. Bishop takes, and now knight f7. So really what white should be doing here is saying, okay, I really need to trade. Once I trade here, and probably king takes back, we'll look at a line real quick. Rook ae1, rook takes. This is a sacrifice line that doesn't work out. White just has an extra piece, lovely position, king over, and rook takes, and white wins, basically. So this is what should happen. However, white thought he could be a little bit tricky and played knight f3, because it looks like, okay, I've got one defender, and he's got two attackers on the pawn. So he should just be able to take rook takes h2, rook takes h2, knight takes h2, and this is an objective win for white at this point. However, I have bishop c6, holding on a little bit longer. If rook takes h2, then we have, we'll look at a line here, rook takes h2, knight takes h2, and then we have this, and we're going to take here, and everything in white's position will fall. Black is clearly winning in this position. So with bishop c6, those are the threats that are entailed. So what white should be playing is continuing to look for a consolidating method. Rook ae1, knight h6, knight g5, closing off the g file to the rook here. And we're going to play knight g4 check, king f1, and this really should hold. Black has some pressure, but it's quite menial. There's nothing too much, nothing too dangerous for white in this position at all. Instead, white chose to play bishop f1. I'm not really sure why. I'm guessing that he was trying to be able to exchange here and then avoid any tempos here, as bishop can now exchange on g2 with a winning endgame for white. However, I have that I can go to knight h6, and we cannot capture here, because if we look at this, then we go knight g4 check, and we're just going to win the rook there. And once again, what he should be looking to do is play rook e1, knight g4 check, king e2, e5. So now this position is quite dynamic again. It's opening up for black, and these hanging pawn structures in the center are proving to be quite advantageous for black. And once again, because white's king decided to run over here, it's not good for him. And this pin is proving quite devastating on this position. Now, instead, white played bishop g2, just returning, and this just fails tactically immediately to knight g4 check, king e2, exchange, exchange, and rook takes g2. So basically what's going to happen here is we're going to play rook takes b2, and everything in white's position will fall. This pin will prove decisive, and at some point black will be able to push the h2 pawn, and this is game over for white. At this point my opponent did resign, so I thought this was quite an interesting game to show, and really I found it quite interesting, mainly because of how I approach the position. Normally I'm quite a strategic maneuvering drawish type player, but if we look back at knight d2 here, so in this position I was quite happy with my decision to go king e7, as I realized that the activity needs to be over on the king side, and king needs to be out of the way so that these rooks can take open advantage of the space on the king side and push the pawns. And then the other thing that I found so interesting was this move h4. Although I did not handle it well, computer says that this position is 0.00 for both sides, and it's quite an interesting sacrifice. Not really a sacrifice as per the lines I showed you, but once again, quite an interesting idea just to smash through white's defenses, and showing how activity can be more important than material count, even if the material is returned at a later point. So thanks for watching, and please comment and let me know if there's anything you want me to make a video on. Thanks.